Hello, everyone. Welcome to In, a series of live online conversations with practitioners in the visual arts. In is broadcasted by New Local Space, a micro gallery and contemporary art initiative in Kingston, Jamaica, and a subsidiary of audio production house Creative Sounds. NLS's 2016 programming is made possible with support from our donor base of over 60 patrons of the arts and our parent company, Creative Sounds. And I want to take this opportunity to say Happy New Year. This is our first podcast for 2016. Happy New Year to everyone out there. This episode of our podcast features a discussion between Jamaica-based writer and independent curator Nicole Smythe-Johnson and Berlin and Oslo-based artist Susanne Winterling. Suzanne's most recent exhibitions include Nature After Nature at the historical Fridericianum Castle, Drift at the Gallery Parota Contemporary Art in Stuttgart, and the Lulenial A Slight Gestury in Mexico City. Working across a variety of media, including film and photography, Susanne Winterling is mostly known for installations that critically intervene in their surroundings through directing attention to the sensual and perceptual qualities of spaces, objects, and the representation of realities. She's also one of the founders of the art collective Academy Isotrope and is a professor of contemporary art. I welcome Nicole Smythe-Johnson, who will be leading the conversation with Susanne Winterling this afternoon. Hello, both. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Susanna. Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much to NLS for offering us this space. I'm so excited to be able to share some of the discussions that Susanna and I have had since we met in Oslo late last year. So I'm going to get right into it with the questions here. Let's start with a little bit of an introduction. Susanna, can you tell me a little bit about your practice? What are your primary preoccupations and how or why did these develop?
Hey everybody, thanks again for inviting me to both of you, and thanks for everybody who's listening. I'm very happy to be in this form of conversation because it also is something that I appreciate a lot in my practice. Coming back to your question, I guess I wouldn't describe myself as very medium specific in art practice. Basically, I use whatever medium seems appropriate for what I want to deal with. But that can be like poetry, that can be living organisms or social networks.
And so what are some of the things that you look at in your practice? What are some of the areas or ideas or?
Oh, okay. Yeah, if we can be right away, we're very concrete or looking more close up into materials. What I'm pretty fascinated with at the moment is a phenomena called bioluminescence, but also things that have to do with the kind of habitat of fungus and certain algae.
And how do you translate that into an art practice? Because normally people are thinking about painting or sculpture or what does that mean in terms of the practice itself? How does that play out?
Yeah, but I don't. I actually don't think it's so different. Like if you would have a classical photographer being interested in light phenomena, or a still life painter who's interested in how certain daylight hits a certain cup of tea and then sparkles in a close-up. I'm doing the same, just that the framework is one that includes also ideas about the world, ideas about relations, and ideas about phenomena. So it's more like an extended palette, but still like a kind of palette of certain colors, compositions, or forms. I mean, now this sounds so abstract again, but it should not be.
So if I'm
I have a question for Suzanne that I want to chime in with. Suzanne, when you're going off of Nicole's previous question in terms of how bioluminescence comes into your practice, is it, and you responding with photography, do you use how do you incorporate it? Do you actually stage bioluminescence in a lab experiments that generate bioluminescence, or are you observing it in nature? Is it something that's contrived? How do you actually incorporate it in your practice and on a more technical from a more technical standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, let's say, if you look at a product that comes out of my practice, very often it's like the form of an installation, but that incorporates different kinds of materials. So I have actually worked with let's say, the lab situation of creating bioluminescence. I'm also interested in like the ancient fables and stories of the people who have lived with bioluminescence since humankind. I'm also interested in the super precarious situations of tourism and natural resources, or issues that come about with global warming and that do actually affect like everyone in sort of the food and water chain, which is like not only something that's like interesting for science. I think it's also interesting for artists, because it opens up another kind of working with materials.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And so, okay, so I read a description of your installation at Miami Basel last December, right? And I think that some of what you're talking about now fit into that installation, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So the way that the Financial Times was talking about it, they said that they know that you're interested in what seems natural but is actually chemical.
Yeah.
And a lot of your work does seem to play between the technological or synthetic and the natural, right? Because you do work in film, you are interested in coding and all of this kind of thing, but at the same time, you're interested in incorporating bioluminescence as part of your palette, like nature in that way. So if you could talk a little bit about maybe that installation and how the technological and the natural are at play in your work in general.
Yeah.
That's a big old question, but we can take it in pieces.
No, I think, I mean, thanks for the super interesting question, because it actually you already connected like a lot of the elements that are important for my practice, because like to have, let's say, like ecological framework does not necessarily mean that you have a certain political framework or a certain playfulness or humor about your own existence in all this mess. For example, which would be like something that's like super at the core of my practice, I would say, even if I'm not so good in describing this by words. But what kind of connects all of these things, and actually all across the medias, is that I think what we have been easily learned to describe as nature and culture is not so separate. It's like much more entangled and connected than we know and are, let's say, consciously, but essentially consciously aware of in our daily practice. And that includes not so much of like a very time-based thing, but it still needs like a consideration of time. Let's say the seasons or certain conditions, for example, for bioluminescence to appear or to transform in, let's say, a super polluted environment into like a new species that we cannot even imagine. Something that sounds like very sci-fi, but it's actually like a super normal thing. These kind of things are very interesting to me because of our technological conditions, let's say, and that I mean that we're all nearly all cyborgs. We're all taking, or in some way or another are affected by pharmaceutical products, by kind of implants, by certain high doses of certain metals through the food chain, through processed food. Okay, I mean, this is like endless, but what I'm saying is that this is not all, it's not up to me to say like it's bad or good, and actually I think there's nothing constructive coming out of saying that, but analyzing like the ways this has happened and also the ways that it will transform the future is something where I think like an artist is challenged.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. I'm sorry, I just have to take a little time to absorb all of that. So what are can you describe your installation at Miami Basel, especially for our
Oh,
audience? People, can also look at Susanna's website, of course, but I think a little description so we have an idea of, again, the materials if we are talking about art, that would be helpful.
yeah, I mean, the installation there was also a little bit triggered by the idea that there has been the climate conference around the same time, and just in a maybe a little bit broader framework, what these dependencies between the art world and ecology are actually weighing in the whole thing. And yeah, so I made this kind of wallpaper that has functioned as like a blown up detail of a wall that was what I call crying, because it had like these huge drops of water, and it looked as if it would be coming out of the wall, because the wall had this like bluish color and a little piece of green in the middle, growing out of it. So it also played with this tension between the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional, and it had within itself like extra parts, prints on plexiglass or vinyl, that had microbes and algae from a very close up in the microscope, blended with actually green photosynthetic cells.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole kind of installation was very much based on a wall. It had some electrical appliances and some blinking light. It had a lot of shiny surfaces. It had like perspectives from the microscope and perspectives like from, let's say, like an enlarged view through one eye.
Yeah.
But it still was like a easy, one or two wall pieces, and you can roll it out.
What space were you showing with at Art Basel Miami Beach, Suzanne?
It was it's one of the galleries that I work with, but the section we were invited was also for artists who deal with, like, let's say, an architectural space as a element.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of usually you don't have, contemporary art spaces are not so much like necessarily wall dated, but at a fair you find yourself, especially if someone who likes to work sculpturally, you find yourself very much thinking about the two-dimensional, because they create these places purely out of wall space, which is like something a little bit boring. But on the other side, when you come from digital imagining and let's say going from Photoshop via After Effects into Cinema 4D, you're kind of like taking something from a two-dimensional into a three-dimensional space, and you warp it out, and a lot of it has to do with like modeling and texturing. So it's kind of like a language that I also wanted to play with, that's not so defined by analog or digital, by a much more complex way of linking images and dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a really good segue because I want to ask you, I know that you've said that your practice is not medium specific. You know, you use whatever makes sense for what you're thinking about or working through. But I do want to ask you, how do you, um, maybe to talk a little bit about the process of selection. How do you select your media and how do you engage? Because I know that you've done a lot of work in film and in animation. Um, and I think that your work really engages medium. All of the specific pieces engage their medium in a very deliberate way. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you know, what that process is like for you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very funny question because I was thinking like why does that seem that like the medium then let's say that comes to me so natural as if it would be like a rainy substance, but that seems to me like suggested by the material itself. It's like I like to say like the matter speaks. I mean, not the dark power, but like the dark matter, the material. Most of it is based on oil if you work with like shiny surfaces and electricity. But I also think that these things are kind of like defined a little bit earlier before you can put them into language. I like to think that, you know, for example, you think of like a certain form that's missing in an installation and or a certain app, and you've never seen this app, or you don't actually know exactly which connections you need it to be working in that place. One way is then to investigate again the material and see if they're not like hidden qualities, or if there are other qualities that have been neglected or that maybe look different now after this season or in this special light or darkness. And I think this is something that very often kind of centered and circled around personalities or certain phenomena, certain kind of connections as well. That have to do, of course, with where I come from or the people that I connect with. A lot of it actually has to do from a living community as well, but also like a community that I maybe constructed myself in my dreams or unconsciousness. But what I'm saying is that it's not all rational, it's not all language based.
Mm-hmm. How you make that determination, you mean? It's not
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, I mean, some people like to call it intuition.
Yeah. So, all right. So, for example, I'm looking at two of your art books here, right?
Right.
Why did you choose to work with books, you know, for either of these? What about this project? Or I know you're saying it's not language based, but I'm hoping that I can like hook you into like, giving me an after the fact account.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, or let's say in the case of the book, it's also something where you become aware that there are like other parts than language that add up to it being like an interesting thing to work with from the production and from the like discovering side. So, for example, a book also is like a strange object. It also has like a haptic quality. Do I go into the right direction of your question now, or?
Yeah.
So to me, for example, in the case with a book, it was interesting to work with a book not as a sign in the sense of like, I don't know, the 90s or something, but in the sense of like an object that that can trigger something in the world. You know, it can either like animate you to pick up the book or to open it. but in that case, I also wanted to play with it. Like, what if it also claims like a space as a surface, not just as a signifier? Oh, open me, and then there's something in it, but with a Scorpio on the cover in a kind of like 1-to-1 size, also claiming it to be like a space, the book as a space.
A physicality of its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Okay, so the next question takes us in a little bit of a different direction. I want to ask, would you say that your work is informed by politics? Because we've kind of talked about all of this, very conceptual stuff. And so I'd like to, use another lens.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say yes, but my understanding of politics is also in a maybe very old school way of being
Did we lose Susanne?
Susanne? Hello?
I think.
relieved from that.
Susanne, you broke up a little bit there.
Oh, really? Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
No, we can, but we missed the first part of your answer.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So yes, I just go back. But where did you lose me?
I asked if your work is informed by politics, you would say that.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
That how you think about politics is in a sort of old school way, and then we lost you.
Yes, I think like we are political, and there's no way out. I don't, if you're like pointing to, let's say, art and activism, I do see like a thin line of distinction there, and I don't think it should be too mixed-maxed. That this line is there, even if it's very difficult to define a lot, and maybe it's also moving. I don't think it's something that's static, like I said before, but still, I think there's a difference. So if you're asking about this, but on the other side, I see like creating an awareness and creating like a political sensibility is something that art has as a task in maybe even Kantian sense. That also sounds very old school.
Yeah, you have to unpack that a little bit for me, for a general audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes when you hear people talking about, a museum is doing well when it has this and this amount of visitors, or a music video is working well when it has this amount clicks on YouTube. If everything becomes like this accountable in numbers in a certain system that has to do with a value of money, it becomes very strange to see the surplus. And this is something that I see very easily happening in the younger generations, but also at the same time, like the frustration that it just is not all there is that can be counted in statistics. And then you see the hunger for all these other things, and that's where it becomes interesting to work.
So you're thinking that this is sort of a space where art, or certainly where your practice comes in that surplus.
Yes.
That unaccounted for stuff.
Yeah.
It's not in the statistics. And I suppose that in itself is a politics, huh?
Yeah, I do, especially in, maybe you always want to see like the times being extremely bad, but I do, let's say, like as an artist living in Berlin and not being a guest here, but actually being someone who has to live with these conditions and who is also in the middle of its happening, I am very worried, and it would be strange if nothing of this would be in the work that I'm doing. That does not mean like in the decisions I make in a composition, but in kind of like creating a tension that also talks about like dynamics of like, let's say, worry or suspense or tension.
And so when you're working with something like bioluminescence, how does that come into that space, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, like, I mean, maybe as the most obvious like connection, one can see the bioluminescence, which is like a pretty picturesque kind of sci-fi looking phenomena that is very lucrative for the tourism industry or for the small, let's say, companies and organizations that are connected to it. But on the other side, as the development has shown in recent years, there are also like species that can come out of a certain hyperproduction that are threatening, so they become the opposite of, let's say, a pleasant attraction as a natural phenomenon. They become this like toxic threat of our very close environment and food chain. So even there, in like the view on one phenomenon, you have these both sides, and they both have to do a lot with our existence and with our treatment of, let's say, certain hierarchies we apply that are not necessarily actually there, but that are invented by us, and they become our own obstacles. So to kind of like to make people discover this also on an intuitive level, I think is like an interesting task I would like to take on.
Because we have a bioluminescent lake in Jamaica, as you know, I've told you, in Trelawney.
Yeah.
And there's a town nearby called Falmouth that they're developing a port for. And bioluminescence, just for the listeners, if people are not familiar, they're these tiny creatures that occur in certain parts of the world where they're usually in water, and when you move, they light up. I've actually been to one, and you can swim around in there, and when you move your hand, you see light behind your hand and that kind of thing. So we have one of these, and they're developing a port at Falmouth. And just thinking about what you're saying, of course, the government is like, yes, having more development and having a port and setting up the city better, will be good for the numbers, right? There'll be jobs and there'll be whatever, all these like statistical representations of development. But at the same time, one of the things that makes Falmouth so amazing, which is this lake, is now at risk because they're not actually doing work on the lake itself, but changing the geography a little bit down the coast impacts everything around it. Because of course everything is connected. So there's a lot of concern that the lake will not survive all of the development that they're doing. A lot of people would like that to be a part of the consideration, but it's just not. It's hard to face up. It's hard to compete with those statistical versions of the world.
Yeah.
So am I making the right kind of connection? Yeah.
No, of course. I mean, I'm surprised how, even me not having been in the Bay, but I already suggest that there will be similar things than in other places. And it can be locally super, super specific, but some of these patterns are connected.
And so you visited bioluminescent lakes in other parts of the world, right? You haven't been to Jamaica, but where have you?
No, unfortunately not. It's still hopefully happening at one point.
Yeah, because you had mentioned a connection with, I think, Puerto Rico. Is this through the same project?
Yeah, that's kind of where I started being interested in the actual space. Before, I kind of like thought of it as an interesting concept and, a kind of like ecological alarm system that interested me conceptually, but not so much from its, let's say, biological material that came later, also through the, let's say, parallelism between kind of writing code and experimenting in a kind of like lab situation.
Okay, and so how are you planning to move forward with this project? Because I know that you have plans for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot that I haven't really explored. I'm still collecting places where bioluminescence is like a seasonal and a new phenomena, because that is something I have not actually done so much. So I'm kind of like more interested in like how the development goes in terms of like a global net, and I'm trying to connect to like some statistics that have been done more than regional. A lot of it is very regional, so I'm trying to get also a kind of connection with conductive fabric, simulating like an overall touch screen and connecting the different materials in a spatial organization. Let's say like an installation without any wires again. Yeah, these are some of the things that I'm doing. I'm also trying to connect 3D printed algae and like certain light environments for photographing, and also for like a spatial immersive feeling. Only with light and this 3D animated algae.
Okay, I have two questions for you, Suzanne. One is, so if I understand correctly from what you just said, you've been kind of touring around, traveling and observing bioluminescence in nature. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand? And then another thing I wanted to ask you was, you have a background in science. Is that where did your interest in bioluminescence arise? I don't know if you have what's your background like?
Mm.
Two questions.
Yeah, one could easily think that I would have an interest or like a background in physics or something. I think I would have liked that too. I'm actually missing that. But no, I do have a background in humanities and a little bit in philosophy of science, but not really in like studying chemistry. I did like two major topics for finishing college, and there I did like a major in biology, but that is a very, very low level. But I think it's something that became more important after, let's say, the early 2000s of so much conceptual art missing material, and then at the same time being politicized, let's say, in my generation, from a certain background of anarchism and certain political activities, also around filmmaking and poetry. That kind of like mix also led to like a bigger framework of things are more connected than we think, not only in terms of like politics in Europe, but also in terms of like sounds that travel the ocean, or resources that disappear, and that their disappearance makes crack a part of the earth kind of like structure that we have no idea what will happen if that is missing. Also a kind of like sci-fi tendency, or affinity to sci-fi for sure, kind of pushed that. So not only like, I mean, I'm pretty aware that what I'm doing is like very far away from science, and maybe even using science in a way that's not correct, or whatever you want to say, but I wouldn't even say I'm going so far. I think art and science always have been like connected in a mutual interest, and a mutual also productive interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So are you, Suzanne? That's very interesting and that's very cool, and I agree with you. I wanted one of my other questions that I had for you was, are you observing bioluminescence in nature? And are you traveling to various locales to observe, or what's your, or are you looking at it mostly from a regional perspective, from what's most readily available to you where you actually reside?
Yes, thanks. I mean, yeah, that would be a dream state, just to travel around places where you have bioluminescence. I remember that in the early days, some of my friends made this joke that I tell the algae where to be so that I can travel to all these fancy places. But it's not like that, and I have to admit that the first time I had this idea of like really not just something that you follow in your head as like a hobby or a side interest, but as something that I really wanted to deal with and bring into an installation, or kind of like turn into something that I have formed and put together in another way than how I found it before, was a lab situation for a commission. And in the short time of the commission, I was not able to kind of like grow the algae, but I started like seriously finding out, what time of the year I would have done that, and kind of like got this equipment and to really kind of make it happen. Then I started looking into, okay, so where is it in a natural place, whatever that natural means. And as you recognize, I don't believe in these dualistic terms, but so I started kind of looking into places, and one of them is in the Caribbean, or a lot of them are in the Caribbean. So then I actually really went there, and maybe with a little bit like a field trip feeling, but not so much as like somebody who collects all the places, but more as like, okay, let's take this one place and see it as an exemplary microcosm.
Mm-hmm. And that was Puerto Rico.
And that was Puerto Rico, yes, because it happened of like some fantastic people that connected me and that actually enabled, and a really great community in San Juan of artists and researchers who actually give the physical space for something like this. They enabled me to really like, go on a boat with my own camera and my, let's say, not equipped for this kind of National Geographic expenditure.
And what was the name of that space?
Sorry?
What was the name of that space that invited you or that hosted you?
Oh, that was Beta Local in San Juan, a kind of art space community where people support and encourage each other, and it's also a great space for certain activities around computer, around certain old skills that need to be like kept, and yeah, it's just like a great space with fantastic people.
Yeah, I know of Beta Local. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Oh, cool. Nice. First time hearing about them. Okay. All right. So my next question, Susanna, I want to ask you about some of your heroes, right? Artistic and otherwise. And I asked this question because Kirsty Bell, who wrote an essay in one of your art books, has noted that you layer your work over that of a figure you admire. And some examples she brought up were Eileen Gray, Anne-Marie Schwarzenbach, and we've certainly discussed Ada Lovelace and how you're thinking about her life and her work through your practice. So mentors seem like an integral part of your thinking. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that, please. Or
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like, even with thinking about the project with the algae, I would say part of what I'm doing is also seeing the algae as a kind of like personality, but not like a personality in the sense of like history. Um, But yeah, there's something in that process. It's not always just pure admiration, but I think it's more productive if there is a lot of admiration involved. That can also lead to a kind of like critical engagement. If I, for example, think of like my some of my favorite artists or architects, where I also see like a lot of very strange alienation, like for example in this Mexican artist La Barragan. There's something that was really strange about his work that fascinated me. It's not like a one-to-one, oh, this I'm the groupie of this hip hop star. It also has something that's difficult for me to understand, that I need to find out, a mix of a detective work as well. So yes, there are these people, and I don't really mind if they are, let's say, dead or alive. It doesn't matter to me if this is like a figure that comes out of a comic, or if it's someone who has lived around 1830s, like Ada Lovelace.
Yeah. So, and what's interesting to you about somebody like Lovelace? Just because I think it's a great story. I don't know how many people are familiar with her, and I think that how you think about her in your practice is also interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like I think you've mentioned, or Demi mentioned before, that part of what is interesting to me is this seemingly clash between technology and subjectivity. And in a case of if you read or let's say you see, there's also like a super nice film by Lynn Hershman Leeson about Ada Lovelace, as kind of like an impression or like a fictive story in somebody else's life connecting to Ada Lovelace. So there are all these half fantasies and half realities, a little bit like with the Greek poet Sappho as well, where we only have fragments, but then it gets even more interesting to kind of like come up with all these stories. I think Ada Lovelace probably is also a figure like that. The other interesting thing is that it maybe has really not been Turing who invented the computer, and as we know, human history has this funny thing of like always wanting to stick someone out and saying like, oh, this has been the highest mountain, this has been the person who was at the origin of electricity, or I don't know what. And again, this would be like a very repeated case of like a woman being called hysterical and kind of stepping over the boundaries that were given to her by who knows who, that did not get to like a potential and kind of like an interesting, let's say, cultural phenomena that you can weave out of that singular story, so that you can imagine there's a huge carpet of these kind of stories, and that have decided so much of what later becomes, computer culture, or that has become art and science culture.
Yeah, because Lovelace is she's the first computer programmer, right?
Yeah.
Like she sort of designed a mechanical computer.
More like on the coding side, more like in the programming, the algorithms.
And let's talk about the period that, I mean, I guess we're assuming that our audience knows about Ada Lovelace and the period that she lived in. She's considered to be the first computer programmer, but she also lived from 1815 to 1852.
Yeah. And her father was Lord Byron, the poet, like famous romantic poet, a sort
We
of
also
ladies'
had,
man archetype.
yes, and very strange ideas about art and science, I guess, and art and society as well.
He had strange ideas.
No, I mean Lord Byron. I think wasn't he banned and then had to live in Greece till he died, and there's like a lot of very strange rumors about his lifestyle, and a bit of a dandy, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
Very, very interesting story. Worth looking at. And a lot of these other figures, because Eileen Gray is also an architect who only ever constructed one building, which was I was reading about this in this essay. It's actually a really good essay in this here. But who actually only constructed one building, a vacation home for her and her lover with a beautiful pool that you reproduced in an installation.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds very funny, an architect who only, I mean, I guess, you know, a lot of super good architects don't even build one single house. I don't know how that functions, but it seems to be possible. She did, however, most of her fame was also grounded on her furniture design, where she contributed to some of the most amazing pieces in, let's say, what people call classic furniture. I mean, I don't actually know anything about design. I just think that the way I grew up in like West Germany was very much defined by modernism, to an extent that you needed like all this, you jumped into all the hippie stuff because you were just so tired of all this fetish around modernism. And part of like her work for sure is also early modernism, but it has like this slight twist and this like much more interesting aspect about how design, how furniture and the human body should function, and the same with architecture. And I think that's why some of her ideas, they might have been like super alien at that time, but in a way super avant-garde, and they're actually now more interesting to us living 2016 than they were to the people at that time, because then everybody was flashed by the Industrial Revolution. They didn't think that, you know, metal might be nice and shiny, but in the end does not kind of adopt to the body, whereas certain leather formations adopt to the body and to the human structure that is never like one like each other. So she was just like so much more ahead in certain principles about furniture, architecture, and the human body that there are things that kind of transcend the personal history of what she actually has built in terms of houses, when you look at her approach to life and art.
Yeah. And so is this a very deliberate process for you, kind of identifying these inspiring figures? Because you've talked about how human history creates these mountains. Well, it seems like you also quite actively create mountains in through your practice. It may be different kinds of mountains. But is that a deliberate step for you, or is that something that just kind of happened or started happening?
I mean, I think very often it's a kind of strange solidarity in certain struggles, like where you also want to highlight stories that are maybe not so much in the middle. But then, of course, you know, it's a trap to think that everything from the margin can be brought into the center. I'm also pretty sure that that is an illusion, and that you first have to clear the position from where you are talking from. And that's maybe why I'm so much interested in the algae, in identifying, let's say, with something that has so much disregard, in a way that it's obviously a clear political statement to say, like, oh, I'm going to be on the side of these, you know, creatures, in a way. That it becomes like more obvious also on a intuitive level. Because I think like the way you pick certain things, yeah, sometimes there's a seduction, there's like a, you know, even maybe erotic aspect of it, but a lot of it is also, you know, triggered by something you liked in your childhood, by the taste of aloe vera in a soda drink, or by the way you saw the light in the morning.
Yeah. Okay, so we're quite close. We're almost out of time, and I have so many questions left. I'm trying to figure out what to ask. Okay, so I have a series of questions. What artists are you looking at now? What's the best show you've seen lately? Is there anything super exciting that you'd like to share? I think you're looking
Wow.
from a whole different perspective. We don't get a lot of.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of a cool that's a cool question that like squeezes like right at the moment. I have been listening to like a strange kind of engineer philosopher that maybe some of you know way better than I do. He used to work at MIT, and he was basically the inventor of the first computer language or voice called Eliza, like this, the first responding back programming, let's say. I mean, okay, this sounds very funny. Anyway, he there's like a lot of like strange interviews with him, also around the topic of structural violence and yeah, repeated patterns of violence that I've been thinking about lately. Also,
Yeah.
Susanne, you chipped out.
Oh, is she gone? That's what happened.
Yeah.
ways of grasping.
Oh.
Suzanne.
Yeah, we lost you for a moment there.
Oh, okay. I guess it's like a bit too much.
Yeah.
You hear me? You hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so I've been listening to this guy, but I don't know where this will lead to.
In terms of your work, you're thinking.
Yes.
But I don't know which guy because I think you chipped out before we heard even who you were looking at.
Yeah, the
Oh,
name.
he's the inventor. I would have to Google him again as well, but he invented the first computer voice called Eliza. So before Siri, there was the first one that was Eliza. So I've been looking into what this guy's ideas about technology and society were pretty interesting. I'm also listening to or reading a lot of poetry and a book on the group Anonymous that I have to recommend to all of your listeners because it's an absolute must.
And Anonymous released a book of poetry?
You couldn't call it like that. Someone wrote a book on Anonymous and the whole context.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, around.
I see.
Yeah.
And separate to that, I'm always reading a lot of poetry.
Any poets in particular right now?
Actually, recently I came across this poet from Jamaica called Uncle something.
I don't know.
Who could that be?
It's the second name. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you will know. But I've ordered some of his books and only read things that people recommended me, so I can't really. It's in the early stage.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of Jamaican poetry in the news lately, so I think it's
But the poet is named Uncle something, or that's the name of
Yes.
the poem?
No, I think it's his name. It's his artist name.
Okay.
Oh, no. I'll look it up. And do we have any questions, Deb?
No, I don't have any other questions to Suzanne. I mean, we're kind of out of time. I do want to hang around after we stop the broadcast and chat some more. I guess one thing we like to sign off on though, Suzanne, is we usually like to sign off by asking the artist or whoever it is that we're interviewing what your most imminent project is, like what's upcoming, what do you have coming up that you want to tell our listeners about? Any exhibitions?
Yeah, so basically I'm in the last parts of rendering, and then of course there needs to be like some stuff from the sound design that's missing, but I'm working on a new animation that shows the collective clustering of the algae in a kind of planetarium setup. So check out when that is ready. I would, I haven't set like a precise date, and it's not, of course, it's not like in any kind of cinema, unfortunately. But please join for the first time that will be screened.
Will you debut it on your website or?
Yes, yes, it will be. I mean, sorry, it sounds like very fuzzy, but it's gonna take like 2 more months. Anyway, that's like something where I'm super, super excited about, and an upcoming show on dark material. As I told you, I'm kind of like trying to explore whatever that is that sucks you in, and that happens on a material form when you get the impression in sound or also in depth. And another part of the touchscreen version will be ready with a conductive fabric.
What?
So that would be like way too much to start talking about that, but that is like on the electronical level.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So your website, we'll share your website, the link to your website on the below the link to the podcast. So on our YouTube channel, we'll put it in the description, the link to your website, so people can check it and stay in touch with you on the projects that you're working on and where they can actually see them. So so everybody look out for that. And I guess we'll sign off now. And Susanne, it's been wonderful talking to you. And as I said, hang around a bit after we come off of the air so we can chat a little bit more. Nicole, it was a pleasure having you as well. And it was really enjoyable listening to both your conversations. And this will be archived. For anybody who's listening live right now, just know that this will be archived on the YouTube channel. It will be saved there for forever. So you can come back and check it out whatever and share the link. All right. Goodbye and have a great summer.
Bye bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.